Wyoming Territory, August 1879, the wind swept low across the plains near the Bighorn Mountains, tugging at the hem of Bess Langford's dress as she stepped off the westbound stagecoach and into the dust-blown town of Fairburn. Her hat was pulled low, shadowing the left side of her face. A wide, pale scar stretched from her cheekbone to her jawline, the skin puckered and pink even years after the fire. People stared. They always did. She kept her eyes down and her hands tight around the handle of her worn leather bag. The coach driver gave her a nod, but no one offered to help her down. She did not expect them to. Bess had long stopped expecting kindness. "Ugly thing, ain't she?" A voice muttered from across the street. A boy, no older than 12, laughed as his mother hushed him too late. Bess did not flinch. She had learned how to hold herself still like stone. The town was no different than the last wood-planked sidewalks, saloons with swinging doors, and men who drank too early in the day. She had come here to start over. She always came to start over. The boarding house sat on the edge of town, and she walked there alone, boots crunching gravel. The sun pressed down on her back, and she welcomed the heat. It reminded her she was still standing. She had barely set her bag inside her rented room when a knock came at the door. She opened it to find a tall man in a dusty hat, a rifle slung across his shoulder and his shirt collar half open. His eyes were pale gray, the kind that caught everything. "You Bess Langford?" he asked. She nodded once. "Name's Porter Ellery," he said. "Your uncle hired me to bring you out to the ranch, said you might need someone who knows the land." "I do not need a babysitter," she replied. He smiled, but not in a mocking way. "Did not think you did." She followed him out to a paint horse he had saddled for her. He offered her help into the saddle with a hand held out, but she ignored it and mounted on her own. He said nothing, just climbed onto his own horse and started west. They rode in silence for a while, the land stretching wide and gold around them. Antelope scattered in the distance. Bess kept her gaze ahead, but she could feel his eyes flick over to her now and then. Not in pity, not in disgust, just seeing her. At the Langford ranch, her uncle barely looked up from the porch when they arrived. He was older now, slower, and the house looked more weathered than she remembered. She had not seen him since the fire, but she did not expect warmth. He gave her the spare room and told her he would need help with the books in town. That was fine by her. She had not come for affection, just a place to breathe. The next morning, she found Porter already saddled and waiting. "No need for you to ride with me," she said. "Your uncle asked," Porter replied. "Besides, I was headed that way." She narrowed her eyes at him. "You always this helpful? Only when I want to be." They rode together again, and this time he talked a little. Mostly about horses, the drought, cattle rustlers up north. He asked nothing about her scar, and she offered nothing. Over the next week, he kept showing up. At first it irritated her how he kept finding reasons to stop by the ranch, or walk her horse out of town, or sit near her at the general store. But he never asked about the past, never looked at her like she was broken. One morning, as they rode into town, a woman near the mercantile whispered behind her gloved hand, "That poor girl with the face." Bess turned her head away, jaw tight. Porter heard it. He pulled his horse up short and looked straight at the woman. "You know, I was raised to believe ugly words say more about the speaker than the subject." The woman flushed and turned away. Bess said nothing, but something shifted in her chest. That night, she sat on the porch with Porter. The sun was low behind the hills, turning the sky pink and orange. He handed her a tin mug of coffee without a word. "You do not have to keep pretending," she said quietly. He looked at her. "Pretending what? That I am not marked? I see your scars." His voice was steady. "They do not make you any less of a woman. They just make you easier to recognize." She blinked at him. "Easier?" He grinned. "You stand out, not because of what happened to you, but because you still stand." She stared at him, unsure what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like that, like she was whole. Later that week, a flash flood hit near the ridge, trapping a young boy in a washed-out gully. The boy's name was Milo, and he had wandered off from his family's homestead. Porter and Bess were out mending a fence when they heard the shout for help. Without thinking, Bess jumped from her horse and slid down into the mud, grabbing the boy's arm just as the water rose over his knees. He was crying, terrified, but Bess held him firm. "You are safe," she said, gripping him tight. You are safe now. Porter reached down and pulled them both up with a rope. She was soaked through, her dress clinging to her, hair plastered to her cheeks. The boy clung to her like she was his mother. That night, as the storm died down, Porter stopped beside her near the barn. She was brushing out one of the horses, dirt still streaked up her arms. He watched her for a long moment. You saved that boy. He was just a child, she said. You could have been swept off yourself. I have lived through worse. He stepped closer. That is what I mean, she met his eyes. He reached up slowly and touched her face, not the scar, but the corner of her jaw, gentle and sure. Do you know what I see when I look at you? He asked. She shook her head. Strength, kindness, fire. Bess lowered her gaze, but he tilted her chin back up. I see beauty, Bess. Not in spite of your scars, because of everything you carry with them. She did not flinch this time. She let his hand stay there, warm against her skin, and for the first time in years, she let herself believe he meant it. She whispered, You are not pretending, are you? No, he said, voice low. Not even a little. The days leaned into late summer slowly, the heat deepening, the grass along the creek edges yellowing to straw. Bess spent most mornings at her uncle's work table, sorting through livestock ledgers and tallying feed orders in neat, cramped script. She didn't mind the quiet rhythm of numbers. It gave her something to hold that didn't shift beneath her feet. Porter wasn't always around, but when he was, he never came empty-handed. One morning it was a bushel of wild chokecherries. Another, a pair of worn gloves he'd stitched a new seam into for her. He never announced these offerings, just left them where she'd find them on the railing outside her window, beside the grain sacks near the water pump. She never thanked him out loud. He never asked her to. One afternoon, Bess rode out alone to the northern pasture to check on a barbed wire line her uncle worried rustlers might cut. She liked the solitude, liked how the land didn't ask anything from her. But halfway through the eastern stretch, her horse stumbled, and she felt it instantly, the limp in the right foreleg. She dismounted, walked the mare back slowly, reins looped in her hand. She reached the barn by dusk. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and pine pitch from the stacked posts Porter had been cutting. She didn't expect to find him there, but he was seated on an overturned crate, oiling his saddle straps by lantern light. She go lame? He asked, not looking up. Favoring her right, she said. Didn't see a stone, but I might have missed it. He rose, wiping his hands on a rag before taking a look at the mare's leg. She watched him press gently along the tendon, his fingers unhurried. After a pause, he said, You ever been to Medicine Wheel? She shook her head. It's a good ride up toward the mountain. Old place, sacred to the Crow, Cheyenne, others too. Not many settlers go near it. She waited, unsure if he was inviting her or just talking. He glanced up. I go there sometimes. Makes the world feel bigger than whatever's gnawing at me. She didn't answer at first, then quietly, I'd go, if you're willing to show me. They left just after dawn the next morning. Porter brought a pack mule with supplies and a canvas roll for sleeping. Bess rode a younger gelding borrowed from her uncle's corral. The trail wound north through forested hills, spruce and fir thickening as they climbed. Birds called from high branches. A bull elk crossed their path around mid-morning, its antlers crowned in velvet. They camped that night in a hollow near a shallow stream. Porter built the fire and Bess boiled coffee over the coals. She sat with her knees drawn up, watching the flames shift through orange and cobalt. Porter leaned back on his elbows, eyes fixed on the stars. My mother was Oglala. My father ran horse stock between Fort Laramie and Cheyenne. They weren't together long. Bess glanced over, surprised. She died when I was 12. Fever took her. After that, I worked for whoever'd feed me, ranches, cavalry stockyards. Some months I slept under wagons. Others with a roof. She didn't ask why he was telling her. She just listened. He added, Folks have always looked at me like I didn't quite belong, too white for some, too red for others. I used to think if I worked harder, earned more, rode straighter, it'd matter less. Never did, Bess nodded slowly. They stared at me like that, even before the fire. I was too tall, too quiet, never smiled the way girls are supposed to. You still don't, he said, grinning faintly. She narrowed her eyes at him, but the corner of her mouth lifted. The next day they reached the ridge. The Medicine Wheel lay across a high, open plateau, stones set in a wide circle, spokes of rock stretching from the center. Wind tugged gently at her coat hem, and the sky felt impossibly wide. Bess stood at the edge of the wheel, silent. She could feel something there, weightless and old. She didn't speak until Porter stepped beside her. "Do you believe places can remember?" she asked. He folded his arms. "I believe they hold things. Not like people do, more like a tree holds sun or a rock keeps warmth after dark." She stared at the pattern of stones. "I don't want to carry bitterness, I want to carry something useful." He reached for her hand, not quick, just steady. His palm was rough, warm. "You carry more grace than you know," he said. When she looked at him, she didn't see hesitation. Just the kind of calm that could weather a storm without bending. She let her fingers rest in his. That night they returned to the same hollow. She lay awake beside the fire, the stars whispering above. Porter's breathing was even, his hat tipped down over his brow. She turned toward him, the firelight catching the edge of his jaw. "Do you ever think about staying?" she asked. He didn't move. "Every day," she hesitated. "I thought I'd never let someone close again. Not really, but you don't ask for what I'm not ready to give." "I've got time," he said softly, "so long as you're walking beside me." She reached out, brushed a piece of dried grass from his sleeve. "Then let's walk. And see what builds." He nodded once, eyes still on the sky. That night she slept easy, and when morning came she didn't dread returning. She was no longer walking away from something. She was walking toward it. The first frost came early that year. It laced the tall grass along the pasture edges in silver and left a brittle hush over the land. Bess rose before the sun, pulled on her shawl, and lit a fire in the kitchen stove. Her breath clouded as she moved, but she liked the quiet of those early hours, the way the world seemed to hold still just long enough to let you gather yourself. Porter had taken to arriving before breakfast on certain days, never knocking, just brushing the snow from his hat and setting it near the hearth like he belonged there. And maybe he did. Her uncle never said much about it, only glanced up from his coffee and muttered about the price of oats. That morning, Porter came in carrying a narrow wooden box under one arm. He set it gently on the table and untied the string. Bess stood at the stove, stirring cornmeal into boiling milk. "What have you brought now?" He lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in linen, lay a fiddle. Dark wood, worn smooth along the neck. The bow rested beside it, hair newly strung. She turned, wiping her hands on her apron. "Is it yours?" "It was my mother's," he said. "She used to play in the evenings, said it kept the wolves away." Bess stepped closer. "I didn't know you played." "I don't," he admitted. "Not well, but I thought maybe you did." Her fingers brushed the edge of the case. A long time ago, before the fire. He didn't press, just slid the box toward her and stepped back. She didn't touch it right away. That night after supper, she brought it out to the porch. The moon was high, cold and white above the cottonwoods. She tuned the strings by feel, her ear catching the pitch, her hand steady despite the years. When she drew the bow across the first string, the sound came out thin, scratchy. But she didn't stop. Porter leaned against the porch post, arms crossed. "Sounds like it remembers you." She tried a waltz her mother used to play on summer nights. The notes stumbled, but they found their shape as she went. When she finished, she lowered the fiddle. "I thought music left me when everything else did." He stepped forward, quiet. "I think it was waiting." She let the fiddle rest on her lap. "You always say things like that, like you know where to put words so they don't cut." "I've had to learn," he said. "Some wounds don't close unless you speak careful around them." Later that week, Bess rode out with Porter south of the river where her uncle had leased grazing land. The cattle were restless, shifting along the fence line. A young steer had gone missing, and tracks led into the cottonwood draw. They found it tangled in brush, leg broken clean. Porter knelt, checked the wound, and stood slowly. "There's no fixing it." Bess looked away, but he handed her the rifle without a word. She took it, held it steady. When the shot rang out, the silence afterward was thick as wool. As they rode back, the sun low behind them, she said, "I never meant to stay this long." Porter didn't answer right away. "You looking to leave?" "I don't know. I came to start over, but I didn't expect to find anything lasting." He turned in the saddle. "You think what we've got isn't?" She kept her eyes straight ahead. "I don't know what to call it." "You don't have to call it anything," he said. "But it's there." She was quiet a long time. "Then, when I was burned, I stopped looking in mirrors, for years, not because it hurt to see. Because it felt like I was gone. Like the part of me people looked for wasn't there anymore. He didn't rush her. Just let the horses walk slow through dry grass, she added, but you look at me like I'm still here. You are, he said. All the way through. That evening, she sat beside him on the porch again, the fiddle resting against her knee. The sky was turning violet, the last light brushing the tops of the hills. She asked, "What do you want, Porter? For yourself, I mean." He looked out over the pasture. "A place where I'm not between things, not too much of one world, not too little of another. A home. A woman who sees me plain and stays anyway." Bess turned her face toward him. "You already have that." He looked at her then, and something unspoken passed between them, no rush, no heat, just the quiet settling of truth. She reached across the space and took his hand, not because he needed reassurance, because she did, and he didn't let go. Not even when the wind picked up, not even when the cold came down from the mountains. September settled in with the hush of dry leaves and the low, distant call of sandhill cranes moving south. Bess could feel the season turning every time she stepped outside, the air thinning, the colors bleeding from green to rust. The Langford ranch slowed alongside it. Calves were weaned, the last hay stacked, and her uncle spent most of his days on the porch now, fingers too stiff to mend wire. Porter had started building a lean-to near the south fence line, said it was for tack and tools, but Bess knew better. He measured the ground too carefully, checked for morning light too often. He never said he meant to stay, but he didn't have to. They hadn't spoken of the thing blooming between them since the night on the porch, and she found she didn't need him to name it. But the stillness between them had changed. It was no longer silence. It was waiting. One morning, she rose to find the kitchen cold. No firewood stacked inside, no signs her uncle had stirred. She walked to his room, knocked lightly, then opened the door. He lay beneath the quilt, eyes open but unfocused. "You all right?" she asked. He didn't answer at first. Then hoarse, "I can't feel my fingers." She moved to the bed, touched his forehead. He wasn't fevered, but his skin was pale and waxy. She rode hard into town, asked the doctor to come. By the time she returned, her uncle was asleep again, breathing shallow. Doctor Elbridge, a man with a stiff collar and tobacco-stained hands, examined him quietly, then stepped out with Bess onto the porch. "It's his heart," he said. "Not much to be done now. Keep him warm. Let him rest." She stared past the edge of the yard where the sun sat low behind the cottonwoods. "He's not a kind man," she said flatly. "But he took me in." The doctor shifted. "Kindness don't always come with softness. Sometimes it's just not turning you out." After he rode off, she sat beside her uncle's bed, listening to the wind knock soft against the shutters. He stirred once, and his eyes found hers. "You still got the books in order?" he rasped. She nodded. "Stocks accounted for, winter feeds arranged." He exhaled, something like a chuckle. "You were always better at it than me." She stayed there through the night, dozing with her head against the wall. Just before dawn, he passed without sound. She didn't cry. She folded his hands across his chest and sat with him until the sky lightened. Porter came before the sun cleared the hills. She met him at the top of the porch steps. "He's gone," she said. Porter stepped closer but didn't reach for her. "What do you need?" "Just help digging," she said. They buried her uncle beneath the cottonwood behind the barn, where the ground was soft and the wind always moved. Only the two of them were there. She read no scripture, just laid a single stone at his feet. Afterward, she scrubbed the kitchen floor clean, boiled lye soap, and cleared every cupboard. Grief didn't make her still, it made her move. Porter waited until evening to speak again. They sat behind the barn where the creek bent gently westward. "You don't have to stay now," he said. "Nothing tying you here." Bess didn't answer right away. "I used to think I was only ever passing through places. Never meant to stop long." He said nothing, just watched her fingers press into the dry earth. She looked toward the half-finished lean-to. "You building that for me?" "No," he said. "I'm building it for us." She met his gaze. "Even now, especially now," he said. "I've seen what you carry, Bess, but I've also seen what you build around it. You make things hold." She stared at him a long time. "You still see beauty in me." He didn't look away. "I never stopped, not once." This time, when he reached for her, she leaned into him, not hesitant, not afraid. Just ready. The next morning, she didn't wake alone. His coat hung beside hers. His tools lay beside her ledger on the table. She poured 2 cups of coffee and left the back door open to the sound of the creak. There was no ceremony, no preacher, just a clear Sunday and the scent of wood smoke. The neighbors came, those who had once whispered and stared. They came with bread, preserves, and quiet apologies disguised as casseroles. Porter stood beside her as they all left, their boots trailing dust back toward town. When the last wagon rolled away, Bess turned to him. "We'll need more fence posts before snow." "I'll get the team ready after supper," he said. She watched the sun sink low behind the ridge. "You think we'll make it through the winter? We've both made it through worse," he said, and that was enough. She reached for his hand, and this time he didn't let go. Not even when the cold wind rose. Not even when night came down. Not ever. The first snow came with no ceremony, just a quiet layering of white over the roof, the fence rails, the bare arms of the cottonwoods. Bess woke to it in the violet light before dawn, the air in the cabin sharp enough to sting her nose as she drew on her boots and stepped outside, arms wrapped around herself. Porter was already out near the lean-to, his breath curling in the stillness, hammering the last plank of siding into place. The structure stood solid now, roof pitched to catch runoff, walls thick enough to hold warmth. She watched from the steps, arms crossed, not from cold but from the weight of something she hadn't named yet. He didn't turn around. "Come see what I did with the shelves." She walked across the packed snow, boots crunching, and stepped inside. The smell of fresh, cut pine hung in the air. The shelves lined one wall, high enough to keep things off the ground, low enough for her to reach. Hooks were set into the beams, some already hung with bridles. He'd even carved her initials into one of the planks near the door, small and square and precise. "You built this like it's going to last," she said quietly. He set the hammer down on the bench. "That was the idea." She looked at him, not the shelves. "You could have gone anywhere, you chose this." "I chose you." She felt her throat tighten, but she didn't look away. "I want to build something with you, not just buildings, a life." "Then we already started," he said. That night, they brought the last of the dried apples down from the loft and sat by the stove, stringing them onto twine. Bess worked in steady rhythm while Porter tied the ends and hung the garlands from hooks near the chimney. The warmth from the fire softened the air, and she let herself lean into the quiet of it, the way his presence filled the room without pressing against it. "I was thinking," she said, threading another slice, "about the north field. We could plant alfalfa come spring. The soil's good there, and it'd help the pasture hold through summer lean." Porter nodded slowly. "And if we added a third milk cow, we'd have enough to trade for salt and sugar without touching the feed money." She smiled. "You already planned it." "I started thinking like this wasn't temporary," he said. She set the needle down. "We should marry," he blinked, not surprised, just still. "You mean proper, I mean us, fully." "I don't need a preacher to tell me what I already know." He reached over, took her hand, rough thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Then tomorrow," he said, "we'll go to town and sign the book, quietly, just us." She nodded once. "I'd like that." The next morning they rode in after breakfast, snow melting off the eaves. The clerk at the courthouse wore spectacles and asked no questions. Bess signed first, hand steady. Porter followed. No vows were spoken aloud. No rings exchanged, but when she looked at him, she felt the steadiness of it settle into her bones. They bought coffee and a sack of flour, then rode home as the afternoon light turned the snow to glass. She didn't think about what they hadn't done, no church bells, no white dress. What they had was truer than pageantry. That night, she lay beside him in the bed they had moved to the front room for warmth. The wind pushed against the windows, but the walls held. His arm lay heavy across her waist, the weight of it anchoring her. She traced the line of his wrist with her fingertips, slow, thoughtful. "You know," she said, "I never thought peace would feel like this." "Like what?" he asked, voice soft in the dark. "Like something I helped build." He kissed the top of her head. "You built all of this, I just helped with the posts." Spring came late, but the ground thawed enough by mid-April to begin planting. They worked side by side, boots sunk into the soft earth, hands calloused but sure. The alfalfa went in first, then onions, then corn. Porter built a coop for hens, and Bess bartered sowing for 2 laying birds from a neighbor. By midsummer, the pasture held green under the sun, and a red calf wobbled after its mother near the stream. They added another room onto the cabin just wide enough for a cradle and a window. Bess never said the word aloud, but Porter caught her once, hand resting low across her belly, gaze far away. He came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her middle. "You feel all right," she nodded, leaning back into him. "I've never felt more like myself." He pressed a kiss behind her ear. "Then we're right where we're meant to be." On the 4th of July, they rode into Fairburn together for the first time since marrying. The townsfolk had changed in small ways. Some faces knew, others faded, but no one whispered when they passed. The general storekeeper greeted Bess by name, and a young boy held the door without flinching. She touched the scar on her face once, out of habit. Porter caught her hand before she lowered it. "You don't need to hide anything," he said. "I'm not," she replied. "I'm remembering who I am." They danced that night in the dust behind the saloon, fiddles scraping out a tune while lanterns swung from porch beams. Porter took her hand and led her in slow circles, her dress catching the breeze, his boots moving easy beside hers. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. When they returned home, the windows glowed with firelight and the land lay quiet around them. Bess stepped down from her horse and looked out over the pasture, where the fence line stretched clean and straight into the dark. "We've made something good," she said. Porter came to stand beside her. "And it'll hold." And it did. Through that winter and the next, through the birth of their first son and the planting of a second field, through every storm, every dry spell, every decision made by lantern light and soft words, they never left the land. They didn't need to. They had built something larger than either of them alone, not perfect, but sturdy. True, and every morning before the sun rose, Bess woke with her hand in Porter's, the world outside waiting to be tended. They met the day together, always and always with love.